The sky over Nevada's barren wastelands burned red as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting eerie shadows over a secret military compound buried deep in the desert. A storm brewed in the distance, the wind howling through the cracked earth like a whispered warning. Inside the heavily guarded facility, something far more dangerous than the elements stirred. Wanda Maximoff, the Scarlet Witch, moved like a phantom through the corridors, her crimson aura flickering against the steel walls. She wasn't here to fight. Not yet. Tonight, she had come seeking answers. For weeks, she had sensed a disturbance, a ripple in the unseen currents of power that ran through the world, something unnatural, something monstrous. Her search had led her here. Project Titan, a classified experiment rumored to have been abandoned after its test subjects lost control. But Wanda knew the truth. The project had never stopped. She reached a vault door, its surface reinforced with layers of vibranium plating. With a flick of her fingers, red energy crackled through the air, melting the locking mechanisms like wax under a flame. The door groaned open, revealing a chamber bathed in dim, sterile light. At its center sat a single vial, a swirling emerald liquid, alive with pulsing energy. The air around it shimmered as if reality itself bent to its presence. Wanda stepped closer, feeling its pull, a strange force whispering to her mind. This was no ordinary serum. It radiated with raw, unchecked power. A sudden noise. Footsteps, heavy, urgent. The guards had been alerted. She turned sharply, her heart pounding like war drums. The first soldier appeared in the doorway, rifle raised. Before he could fire, Wanda flicked her wrist, sending a wave of red force that threw him backward like a rag doll. More came, their weapons blazing. But she wove through the gunfire like a storm-given form, twisting reality around her enemies until they crumbled under their own weight. But in the chaos, she failed to notice the broken vial behind her. The serum had tipped, its glass shattering against the cold metal floor. A single drop splashed against her skin, small, insignificant to the eye. But the moment it touched her, the world convulsed. Her breath hitched, her pulse roared in her ears. Heat surged through her veins like wildfire, spreading faster than her mind could comprehend. The walls warped. The floor trembled. Her body changed. Wanda staggered, gripping the edges of a nearby console as the transformation took hold. It was unlike anything she had ever felt, a storm of power colliding with her very essence. Her vision blurred, her senses sharpened beyond human comprehension. Strength flooded her limbs, her once fluid magic now a raging inferno that refused to be contained. The soldiers watched in horror. Then she looked up. Her eyes, once crimson, now burned with something deeper, a molten glow of unrestrained might. Her breath came heavy, her muscles coiled like a beast ready to strike. The air itself seemed to buckle beneath her presence, a tremor spreading outward as if the very fabric of reality struggled to hold her. Then, in a voice that was no longer just her own, she whispered, "What have they done?" The alarm screamed. The compound trembled, and in that moment, the world as they knew it began to change. The world around Wanda shattered. The walls of the facility rippled like water, the steel beams groaning as if caught in the grip of an unseen force. The very air had changed, thick with energy, charged with something primal and uncontrolled. She could feel it surging through her veins, an untamed power roaring beneath her skin. The serum had fused with her essence, not just altering her strength, but amplifying her very existence. Her heartbeat no longer belonged to her alone. It pulsed with something colossal, something ancient. The guards scrambled back, weapons trembling in their grip. Fear clung to them like mist. They had seen power before, gods, titans, monsters. But this was different. Wanda lifted her gaze, and for a moment, the world went silent. Her breath was slow, measured, but beneath that stillness, the storm raged. Every muscle in her body coiled with impossible strength. Her fingers twitched, and the ground beneath her cracked, spiderweb fractures racing outward as if the earth itself feared what she had become. Then came the first mistake. A soldier, either too brave or too foolish, raised his rifle and fired. The bullet never reached her. Midair, it halted, suspended, trembling, defying all logic. And then, With a slow, unnatural turn, it reversed, racing back toward its owner. He barely had time to gasp before it struck the rifle in his hands, shattering it into dust. The other soldiers didn't wait. They ran. But it was too late. With a flick of her wrist, the walls caved inward, metal twisting like fabric, sealing every exit. The only light came from the flickering alarms, red strobes casting eerie shadows across her face. She took a step forward, but something inside her fought back. A deep tremor ran through her chest, a clash between the magic she had mastered and the unrelenting force now claiming her body. This was not just power. This was something more, something wild. Her fingers dug into her arms as she staggered, fighting for control. A sharp inhale, a desperate grip on the threads of who she was. She had wielded chaos before, danced on the edge of destruction, but this was a storm without an anchor. A voice echoed through the fractured remains of her mind. Give in. It was not hers. A presence. A force. A whisper from something buried deep within the serum, something that had been waiting, watching. Wanda clenched her jaw, her eyes burning with defiance. No, she would not be consumed. With a cry that split the air, she raised her hands, crimson energy erupting in wild, untamed waves. The storm inside her met the magic she had always known, colliding in a breathtaking display of raw, unchecked force. The entire compound collapsed. A mushroom cloud of energy erupted into the sky, lighting the desert night like a second sun. Debris rained for miles. Alarms in hidden military bases across the country screamed to life. And at the center of it all, Wanda stood. Her hair whipped wildly around her face, her breath slow, controlled. The serum's hold had not vanished, but for now, she had won the first battle. She turned, stepping from the ruins like a goddess emerging from the ashes of war. Far in the distance, beyond the smoke and flame, she saw movement. Not soldiers, not machines. Someone was coming. Someone who had felt the shift in the world, the unchained force that now walked the earth. Her fingers curled into fists. Whoever they were, they would find her stronger than ever. And if they sought to control her, they would burn. The desert wind carried the scent of scorched earth, mingling with the remnants of fire and dust. The military compound was no more, just a hollowed-out grave of twisted metal and smoldering ruins. And at the center of it all stood Wanda. Her breathing was steady now, controlled, but the storm within her had not settled. The serum's power coiled in her core, rippling through her muscles, stretching its influence like unseen hands testing their new vessel. She had mastered chaos before, but this was something else. A force that did not bow to will. It demanded surrender. She would not yield. A distant rumble stirred the ground beneath her feet. Not thunder, something approaching. She turned, her sharp gaze cutting through the smoke. In the distance, against the backdrop of the dying fire, a shadow moved, slow, purposeful. Whoever it was, they were not afraid. Then, through the wavering heat, he emerged. A towering figure clad in midnight black tactical gear, his steps unwavering against the shifting sand. His presence carried a weight that pressed against the very air, as if the desert itself acknowledged his arrival. His eyes, sharp as forged steel, locked onto hers with an intensity that held neither fear nor challenge, only understanding. Wanda didn't need to ask who he was. She already knew. James Buchanan Barnes, the Winter Soldier. She had seen his file, countless pages of blood-stained history, a man torn between the sins of his past and the war still raging in his soul. And now here he was, standing in the wake of her destruction, his presence carrying the same gravity as the serum that had changed her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, in a voice steady as stone, he broke the silence. "You need to come with me." Wanda's fingers twitched, red energy flickering at her fingertips. "And if I refuse?" Bucky exhaled, slow and measured, as if already anticipating the fight she was ready to bring. But there was something else in his stance, not hostility, not even authority. Something quieter, deeper. "Then the world comes for you." His voice carried no threat, only certainty. "And they won't stop until they take you apart." The wind howled between them. carrying the weight of his words. Wanda should have been unfazed. She had defied armies, bent reality, stood against gods. And yet something in his presence stilled her fire. He did not look at her as a threat to neutralize, nor a weapon to be claimed. He saw her, the woman fighting to stay in control, the battle waging beneath her skin. Wanda inhaled sharply, the weight of the night pressing against her chest. The serum was still inside her, waiting, whispering, growing. If she stayed here, she would become the storm, an unstoppable force that would tear through everything in her path. And yet, trust was not a luxury she could afford. "Why are you here, Barnes?" Her voice was softer now, though no less guarded. Bucky studied her for a long moment, his gaze unreadable. "Because I know what it's like to lose yourself. And I know what happens when you let them decide what you become." Wanda's pulse thrummed in her ears, a truth buried in his words. A warning, a lifeline. For the first time since the serum touched her veins, she hesitated. The world was already hunting her. That much she knew. But the real question was she strong enough to face what she was becoming alone? The embers of the fallen compound crackled in the silence between them. Then slowly, Wanda took a step forward. Not surrender. A choice. And in the desert night, beneath the weight of what was to come, the witch and the soldier disappeared into the storm. The desert stretched endlessly, a vast sea of shifting sands bathed in moonlight. The ruins of the compound smoldered in the distance, but Wanda and Bucky were already far from its reach, moving like ghosts through the night. The world was waking to what had happened. In the sky above, distant aircraft blinked like stars, their engines whispering through the darkness. They were searching, scanning, hunting. Wanda felt it in her bones. The moment her powers had surged, the moment the serum had latched onto her very essence, it was as if the entire world had turned its gaze upon her. She was no longer just a threat. She was a priority. Bucky led the way, his movements precise, practiced. The sand swallowed their footprints as they made their way toward an abandoned supply outpost, a relic from wars long past. The moment they stepped inside, Wanda's breath hitched. The storm within her had not settled. It stirred, restless, like a beast pacing behind fragile walls. Every pulse of her heart carried raw strength, her magic intertwined with something deeper, something more than herself. She felt it coil in her muscles, waiting for release. Bucky caught her hesitation. "You're shaking." His voice was quiet, but not without concern. She exhaled sharply, forcing her hands into fists. "I can feel it. The serum. It's not fading." Bucky studied her, his gaze unreadable. Then, without a word, he moved to a rusted cabinet, digging through old supplies. When he turned back, he tossed her a canteen. "Water first. Then we figure out the rest." Wanda caught it midair, but her grip faltered. The metal groaned under the pressure of her fingers, too strong. Too much. She inhaled sharply, setting it down before it crumpled in her grasp. "I don't know how to stop this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Bucky leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You don't." She shot him a sharp look, expecting some kind of reassurance, but there was only honesty in his face. "You don't stop it," he continued. "You learn to carry it." His voice held the weight of experience. He knew what it was like to have something unnatural in his blood, to feel the weight of something that was never meant to be yours. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, a sharp beep. Bucky reacted instantly, grabbing a small device from his belt. His jaw tensed as he read the flickering screen. They'd locked onto the compound's wreckage. That means they'll be sweeping outward. We don't have long. Wanda straightened, her instincts sharpening. "Who is it?" Bucky's eyes darkened. "Everyone. Shell would want containment. The military would want control. And then there were the ones who operated in shadows, the ones who didn't care about saving lives, only about owning power." A low hum rumbled in the distance. Not thunder. Engines. They were already here. Bucky moved first, grabbing a rifle from a rusted crate. He checked the chamber, then turned to her. "Can you fly?" Wanda flexed her fingers, feeling the power coursing through her like a live wire. "Not sure I should." He nodded once. "Then we run." Outside, the sand quaked beneath the force of approaching aircraft. The night had been silent before, but now the air was alive with movement. Men in Black Ops gear rappelling from hovering choppers, floodlights cutting through the darkness like knives. Bucky grabbed Wanda's wrist and pulled her into motion. The chase had begun, and the world was closing in. The night exploded. Gunfire ripped through the silence, tracer rounds cutting fiery streaks through the darkness. The sand beneath Wanda and Bucky churned as bullets slammed into the ground, kicking up clouds of dust. They were surrounded. Bucky moved first, a soldier of war, a shadow in the chaos. He weaved between bursts of gunfire, his metal arm gleaming under the floodlights. His rifle barked in response, precision shots dropping two hostiles before they could react. Wanda followed, her hands burning with untamed energy. She could feel the serum's power demanding release, but she held back, just barely. A chopper roared overhead, its spotlight locking onto them. Bucky grabbed Wanda's wrist. "We need cover now." She didn't hesitate. A flick of her fingers, red energy crackling like a living storm, and the sand beneath them erupted. A shockwave tore through the battlefield, hurling soldiers backward and sending the chopper veering off course. Then the air changed. A presence. Wanda felt it before she saw him. From the haze of dust and flickering lights, a new figure emerged, tall, unwavering, a force of nature wrapped in tactical gear. The soldiers parted around him, their weapons lowering as if his arrival alone had shifted the balance. His movements were deliberate, calculated, dangerous. Bucky swore under his breath. Graves. Wanda's brow furrowed. Who? Bucky didn't look away. A specialist. Black Ops. The kind they send when nothing else works. Graves finally stopped a few yards away, his silhouette cast in the glow of the burning wreckage. His voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. Scarlet Witch, you're coming with me. Wanda's fingers curled into fists, the serum pulsing in her veins. She took a slow step forward. And if I refuse? Graves exhaled, as if unsurprised. Then I'd do what I was trained to do. Bucky raised his rifle. You won't get the chance. Graves' lips barely twitched, a ghost of amusement. Then he moved. Faster than any normal man, a blur of precision. In a breath, he was in front of Bucky, knocking the rifle aside with an impact that sent shockwaves up his cybernetic arm. Before Bucky could react, Graves struck, a devastating blow to the ribs, then another to the throat. Bucky staggered, barely recovering in time to block the next hit. But Graves wasn't fighting to kill. He was fighting to dominate, to control. Wanda's pulse surged. The serum inside her reacted. Something snapped. Her magic ignited, red lightning arcing from her fingertips as she lashed out. Graves barely avoided the blast, flipping backward in a motion too precise, too fluid. Not just a soldier, a predator. He landed in a crouch, eyes locking onto her with renewed interest. This isn't just the serum, is it? His voice was quiet, edged with something unreadable. It's you. Wanda's breath was unsteady. She could feel the serum's grip tightening, the storm inside her pushing closer to the surface. Graves took a slow step forward. You can't control it, he said, but I can help you. For the first time, there was no demand in his voice, only certainty, a promise. Wanda hesitated. Bucky, still catching his breath, wiped blood from his lip. Don't listen to him. Graves' gaze never left Wanda's. He wasn't trying to break her. He was trying to recruit her. Let me show you what you're truly capable of, he murmured. And for one terrible moment, she almost wanted to. The desert wind howled, carrying the scent of fire and dust. Wanda stood still, her breath uneven, her heartbeat a war drum against her ribs. Graves' words lingered in the air like a spell. Let me show you what you're truly capable of. A promise, a temptation. And for one terrible moment, she almost believed him. The serum in her blood whispered, wrapping around her power like a serpent, coaxing, urging. Why run? Why fight? She could unleash it, burn through every soldier standing in her way, take control. But then, Wanda. Bucky's voice cut through the storm inside her. She turned, blinking as if waking from a trance. His expression was bruised, bloodied, But his eyes? Steady, grounded. A lifeline asterisk asterisk. You don't want this, he said. Not an order. A reminder. Graves exhaled, shaking his head. You think you know what she wants, Barnes. He stepped closer to Wanda, his presence calm assured. She doesn't need saving. She needs someone who understands. Bucky wiped his lip with the back of his hand, his voice low. Yeah, that's what Hydra told me too. A flicker of something. Annoyance? Amusement? Crossed Graves' face. But Wanda felt it then. A shift in his posture. He wasn't trying to overpower her anymore. He was waiting, studying, waiting for her to choose. The weight of it pressed against her. Two paths, two versions of herself. One where she let go, one where she held on. Then, the roar of approaching engines. Floodlights slashed across the battlefield as armored transports rolled in from the horizon. The second wave had arrived. More soldiers, more guns. No time left. Bucky took a step forward. Wanda, we need to move, now. Graves' gaze never wavered. Come with me, and no one will chase you. No one will fear you. His voice softened. You could be more. Wanda's fingers twitched. More. Wasn't that what she had always wanted? The ground trembled beneath her feet, her power crackling in the air. The choice was hers. And then she made it. She moved, but not toward Graves. A blast of red energy erupted from her palms, slamming into the sand between them. A warning, a barrier. Graves barely flinched, but his expression shifted, just slightly. Wanda's voice was steady now. I decide who I become. Then she turned and ran. Bucky was already moving, falling in stride beside her as the storm of gunfire erupted behind them. Graves did not chase. He simply watched. And as Wanda and Bucky disappeared into the desert night, he smiled, because he knew this wasn't over. The desert stretched before them, an endless expanse swallowed by the night. Wanda and Bucky ran like ghosts, their figures vanishing between the dunes, shadows flickering beneath the silver glow of the moon. The world behind them burned. Gunfire crackled in the distance, but the soldiers weren't chasing them yet. No, Graves was letting them run. Bucky knew what that meant, a hunt. Wanda's breath came fast, her skin flushed with unnatural heat. The serum's power still roared inside her, pressing against her ribs like a cage storm. Every movement felt amplified, stronger, faster, sharper. Yet it wasn't just power she felt. It was the weight of something else, the choice she had made. She glanced sideways at Bucky. He didn't speak, but his grip tightened around the rifle slung over his shoulder. A silent acknowledgement, a shared understanding. She had chosen her path. Now they just had to survive it. The ground trembled. Bucky's instincts screamed, move. He grabbed Wanda's wrist and dove to the side just as a shockwave tore through the sand, splitting the earth where they had stood moments before. A mechanical shriek followed, not a missile, not a bomb, something worse. Wanda rolled onto her knees, eyes flashing. What was? Then she saw it. A shape in the darkness, metal, monstrous, hunting. Drones. Four-legged machines, sleek and predatory, their eyes burning like molten steel. They moved with lethal precision, scanning the desert with cold efficiency. They sent hounds, Bucky muttered. Wanda rose to her feet, her breath steadying. Then let's put them down. The first drone lunged. A blur of claws and steel, faster than any human should be able to react to. But Wanda wasn't just human. Her hands ignited. A single pulse of energy sent the drone spiraling backward, its metal body crumpling like paper. Another leap, Bucky caught it midair, driving his cybernetic fist through its core. The remaining two hesitated. They were learning. A beat of silence. Then, they attacked at once. Wanda raised her hands, but the serum twisted inside her, feeding her strength. Pushing too hard, her magic flared violently, uncontrolled. A wave of energy exploded outward, not just at the drones, at Bucky too. He barely managed to throw himself to the ground as the blast ripped through the air, sending sand flying and metal shrapnel scattering. When the dust settled, the drones were nothing but debris. But Bucky, He groaned, pushing himself onto his elbows. His jacket was scorched, his breath ragged. Wanda's heart lurched. I didn't mean to. Bucky held up a hand, cutting her off. Not angry, just wary. I'm fine. A pause. Are you? Wanda clenched her fists. The power inside her pulsed, wild, untamed. It had almost hurt him. Almost. But next time, her fingers trembled. Bucky saw it, and for the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. But before either of them could speak, a voice crackled through a nearby speaker, low and certain. That was impressive. Wanda's breath hitched. She knew that voice. Bucky turned, rifle raised. His jaw tightened. Graves. His voice carried through the wreckage, but he was nowhere to be seen. He was watching. The hunt wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The voice slithered through the wreckage, unseen yet inescapable. That was impressive. Wanda's pulse hammered against her ribs. Bucky shifted beside her, his rifle steady but his grip tense. The hunt had never stopped. Graves had simply been waiting, watching. A gust of desert wind swept across the battlefield, carrying the distant scent of fire. Somewhere in the darkness, Graves was close. Bucky's voice was low, controlled. He's playing with us. Wanda didn't answer. Her magic still crackled along her fingertips, but she felt the tremor beneath it, the serum's hunger. She had almost lost control back there, almost hurt Bucky. She had fought wars, rewritten reality itself. But this was different. This was inside her, changing her. And Graves knew it. His voice came again, smooth, calculating. I saw it just now. The power, the hesitation, the fear. A brief pause, as if savoring the moment. How long before you lose yourself completely? Bucky's jaw tightened. Wanda, we need to move. She nodded, forcing her feet into motion, but the sand shifted. A trap. Too late. A concussive blast detonated beneath them, sending both spiraling through the air. Wanda's vision blurred. Pain. Heat. A ringing in her ears, she hit the ground hard, her body skidding across the sand. She gasped, forcing air into her lungs. The sky spun above her, the stars sharp and cold. Bucky was already trying to rise, but his left leg was caught under a twisted piece of shrapnel. Blood. Graves' voice returned, closer this time. He was coming. Wanda gritted her teeth, pushing herself upright. The serum screamed inside her, wanting release. She had to fight. Had to end this. Footsteps, slow, measured. Then, from the shadows, he emerged. Graves stepped forward, his silhouette bathed in moonlight, his every movement deliberate. Unshaken, unstoppable. He didn't need a weapon. He was one. Wanda's hands burned with magic, but Graves simply watched her, head tilting. Go ahead, he murmured. Use it. She hesitated, and he smiled. That's what I thought. A blur too fast. Before she could react, Graves was on her. A strike to her wrist, sharp pain. Magic flickered. A second strike, a precise hit to her ribs. The breath left her lungs. She staggered, but he caught her, not as an enemy, but as if he were guiding her fall. His voice was a whisper now, just for her. You think this is about power? His grip tightened, unshakable. It's about control, and you don't have it. Wanda's vision swam. No. Her fingers twitched, the serum roared. And then, a gunshot. Graves jerked back, a curse slipping through his teeth. Bucky, still trapped, had taken the shot. The bullet hadn't killed Graves. It hadn't even slowed him down. But it had distracted him. Wanda seized the moment. Red lightning erupted from her palms, hurling Graves backward. He crashed into the sand, but he was already moving again, because of course he was. Bucky reached for her. Wanda. She didn't hear him. The serum had fully awakened. Her veins burned like liquid fire. Her heartbeat pounded like a war drum. And as she turned back toward Graves, her eyes glowed, not red, but something new, something dangerous. And Graves. For the first time, he looked surprised. The night quivered with energy. The desert wind stilled. Something had changed. Wanda stood in the center of it all, her breath steady, her fingers curled into trembling fists. Her magic had always burned red, but now it pulsed with something deeper, something more primal. Silver streaks wove through the crimson glow, flickering like lightning against her skin. The serum wasn't just amplifying her, it was rewriting her. And Graves saw it. For the first time, the ever-calculating hunter hesitated. His hands twitched at his sides, as if adjusting his plan mid-thought. He had wanted this, had prepared for it. But now, even he didn't know what she was becoming. Bucky groaned, shifting under the wreckage pinning his leg. His voice was rough but sharp. "Wanda, don't lose yourself." She turned slightly, eyes locking with his. For a moment, everything else faded. The fire, the fear, the battle. But Graves moved. Fast. A black blur surged toward her, his body a weapon, his will unbreakable. Wanda didn't flinch. She caught him mid-stride. No incantations, no gestures, just raw, unstoppable force. Graves froze in the air, his body suspended, his limbs locking up as if gripped by unseen chains. His teeth clenched, veins bulging as he fought against the invisible grasp. But there was no breaking free. Not this time. Not from her. His breath hitched as he looked down, his boots no longer touching the sand. She was lifting him, effortlessly. Bucky watched, alarm flashing in his eyes. Wanda. She wasn't listening. Something deep within her had awakened, and it was hungry. Graves' voice was low, strained. "This is what I wanted." She tightened her grip. A tremor rippled through the ground. The very air vibrated. Magic surged around her, a storm without mercy. She could crush him. End it right now. And then, a whisper. Not from Graves, not from Bucky. From within. It slithered through her thoughts, coaxing, tempting. You could do so much more. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She saw images, a world reshaped by her will. No more war, no more loss, no more pain. Just power. Absolute, unstoppable. She could erase the ones who stood in her way, end the cycle of suffering forever. She shuddered. The thought wasn't hers. Or was it? Bucky's voice cut through the haze. "Wanda, don't let him win." Her gaze snapped to him. He wasn't afraid of her, but he was afraid for her. And just like that, the world came rushing back. The fire, the blood, the weight of her power. Graves hung in the air, his body taut, his expression carefully unreadable, waiting to see what she would do. She took a breath, and she let go. Graves crashed to the ground in a heap, his body shuddering as he gasped for breath. Wanda's knees nearly buckled. It took everything to step back, to not let the power take more. She exhaled sharply, turning toward Bucky. But Graves wasn't finished. Even through the pain, he let out a slow, broken chuckle, amused, almost victorious. Wanda tensed. "What are you laughing at?" He lifted his gaze to hers and smiled. "You hesitated," he whispered. "That means I still win." The words pierced deeper than any blade. And in that moment, Wanda realized the war inside her was far from over. The night stretched around them, thick with silence, too thick. Graves lay in the sand, bruised but unbroken, his smirk like a blade pressed against Wanda's mind. "You think this is over?" His voice was hoarse but steady, his dark eyes gleaming. "You think you can fight what's inside you?" Wanda's hands trembled, not with fear, but with power. Too much power. She could still feel it. The hunger, the invitation. The serum had twisted itself into her being, amplifying not just her strength, but her very nature. Every moment it whispered, nudging her toward the abyss, toward something greater. Bucky, still struggling to rise, locked eyes with her. His stare was unwavering. Wanda, a single word, heavy with meaning. She looked at him, and in that split second, she saw the fork in the road. One path, she lets go, gives in, becomes something unstoppable, something the world will fear. The other, she fights, holds on to what's left of herself before it's too late. Graves saw the hesitation and pushed. "You've already lost." He chuckled, forcing himself onto one knee. "You can feel it, can't you? That pull in your veins, that fire in your chest. He exhaled sharply as if savoring the moment. It's only a matter of time. The desert wind howled. Wanda stepped forward. Her magic coiled around her fingers, crackling, shifting. It would be so easy. Just one flick of the wrist and Graves would be nothing but dust. Her breathing slowed. Graves grinned. He thought he had won, that she was about to cross the line. And maybe, for a moment, she had believed it too. Then she unclenched her fists. The magic vanished. Bucky's shoulders slumped with quiet relief. Graves' smirk faltered, just barely. Wanda knelt down beside him, her voice soft, but unshakable. "You wanted me to lose control," she murmured, "to prove that I'm just another weapon waiting to be used." Her eyes darkened. "But I choose who I am." A sudden pulse of energy ripped through the ground. Graves gasped, his body locking up, not from pain, but from the realization of what she had done. Her magic wasn't breaking him. It was breaking his hold on her. The serum inside her, she wasn't his prisoner anymore. She could feel it bend, reshape. Not a burden, not a curse. A part of her, but on her terms. Wanda rose, her gaze never leaving Graves. "You lose." The wind surged, lifting her slightly off the ground, not in rage, not in destruction. In control. For the first time since this nightmare began, she felt free. Graves clenched his jaw, but there was something else behind his anger now. A flicker of respect. Maybe even fear. Bucky moved beside her. His arm brushed against hers. A silent reassurance. A reminder that she wasn't alone. She turned to him, and though she didn't say a word, he understood. This wasn't over. Not yet. But Wanda Maximoff had made her choice. And no force in the universe was going to make it for her again.